My name is Tiffany Lang, and my capstone project is a case study on the use of manipulatives to build deeper conceptual understanding in a middle school mathematics classroom. Before I begin talking about the purpose of my study, I wanted to give a little background on what led me to choosing this topic. So my journey of using manipulatives began because I saw that our school had a lot of manipulatives lying around, and I really wanted to incorporate them into the classroom. So I wanted to gain more insight on how to use them, but when I asked teachers in the district that had more teaching experience, most of them said that it was too time-consuming, or that the classroom became too chaotic, or would mention that they didn't find it useful. So as a new teacher, I took their advice and focused on practicing activities that were more paper-based. What I came to understand was that the district was pushing for students to perform well on the standardized test, STAR, which is the State of Texas Assessments of Academic Readiness. And it was basically easier for teachers to gain results by having students practice with worksheets. What I realized was that the paper and pencil method was more of a short-term solution, and that students seemed to not understand or remember concepts well, and they became less engaged as the school year went on. So I started researching the use of manipulatives, and actually was surprised to find that there was limited research in the middle grades. There were not a lot of lessons specifically designed to align to the middle school curriculum, and most of the research and lessons I found were for elementary level, or interventions, or special education. So I adapted lessons throughout the year and implemented manipulatives whenever I could. And my students had some academic growth, and they were more engaged in lessons, but it seemed like they were engaged because the manipulatives were new to them. The connection between the math concepts was still quite not there. So I decided to attend some professional development sessions, and it really opened my eyes to manipulatives. So I decided to choose this topic because I wanted to understand why manipulatives had been perceived in such a negative way by my fellow teachers, and why they shied away from it, even though what I experienced was an additional layer of conceptual understanding that I hadn't been exposed to before. So the purpose of my literature review is to discuss the benefits of the use of manipulatives in a middle school classroom. Of course, understand why the secondary level teachers perceive manipulatives the way they do. And in the process, I would conduct a case study to see whether or not the effective use of manipulatives would increase student achievement. And with the results, I'm hoping to raise awareness and change perceptions of the use of manipulatives in the middle school grade levels. So the first part of my literature review, I'm going to be defining manipulatives. So research has shown that since the early 1900s, manipulatives have been a crucial part of teaching mathematics. In fact, the national organizations such as National Council of Teachers of Mathematics actually recommends teaching with them. Concrete manipulatives are physical objects that teachers and students use to discover mathematical concepts, or objects that can be touched and moved around and rearranged in order to demonstrate their understanding. Some authors actually refer to models such as pictorial representations as concrete manipulatives as well. And as for virtual manipulatives, it's become more popular in the recent years. Computer technology software allows students to virtually demonstrate mathematical ideas online in place of concrete ones. And it's suggested to be just as effective. Some authors actually go as far to say that mathematical ideas or mental images that students have in their heads can also be considered virtual manipulatives. And with that being said, the next part of the literature review is talking about benefits of student use of manipulatives. So Piaget, which is a Swiss psychologist, actually believed that children needed these concrete experiences to supplement the abstract words and symbols of mathematics when going through the four stages of cognitive development. It's also said in the literature that the use of manipulatives helps build mathematical proficiency and allows students to capitalize on their different learning styles, allowing them to have the opportunity to create multiple representations of a mathematical concept through symbols and pictures. And through the use of manipulatives, they were able to make real-life connections and explain problem-solving through the use of manipulatives, and showcase their understanding and creating that connection of abstract concepts to something that's more tangible. In regards to virtual manipulatives, studies show that it was actually more flexible and more manageable than concrete manipulatives as far as organizational purposes. But one of the biggest advantages was that students were able to save and record the action, and they were able to replay them so that teachers would be able to give them feedback, or they could reflect on their mathematical understanding. But concrete manipulatives are still a really important part of assisting students' thinking and reasoning. It provides a clear mental image that students experience through their senses and leads to a deeper understanding of abstract ideas. Marilyn Burns, which is a mathematics educator, actually stated that it would help provide students a way to test and verify the mathematical ideas, and were a useful tool for problem solving. And it made it more engaging because it wasn't something that was off of a textbook or a worksheet anymore. Another benefit that was mentioned throughout the literature was that manipulatives could provide a lot of support for English language learners. Even though students improved their social language quickly, the academic language wasn't used much outside of a classroom. So manipulatives provided a way to help the ELLs make mathematical language connections. They were able to verbalize mathematical ideas while using the mathematical terminology and with the assistance of manipulatives to allow them to develop a connection of mathematical ideas with the symbolic representations that were more abstract. And all of these reasons above basically provided a way to have students gain a deeper understanding of mathematical concepts. The next part of the literature review was basically talking about the perception of manipulatives in middle grades. So a lot of my fellow teachers shied away from it, as research also states, is because manipulatives are perceived as toys and weren't as useful for the older students. And the mainstream, like general ed classrooms, didn't adapt manipulatives because they were meant for remedial education or student interventions for lower level students, or they were used for special education students. Another big reason was that teachers didn't know how to implement it into the classroom, and therefore it became more chaotic as far as classroom management. They didn't know where to store it. They didn't know how to manage them to make it less time consuming. And because of that, they ended up taking the do as I do approach and demonstrated it in front of a classroom rather than letting students have their time to process the mathematical concepts. And that do as I do approach actually is research has shown that is one of the most common misuses of implementing manipulatives into the classroom, because students end up just mimicking whatever the teacher's actions are rather than thinking for themselves and understanding those concepts. The last part is actually the implementation of manipulatives in the classroom. One of the most important things is the students being familiar with manipulatives so that it wouldn't cause an extra layer of frustration. The literature suggests that making manipulatives a regular part of the classroom supplies and having it available to students at all times would definitely benefit them being able to communicate their mathematical understanding in real-life situations. And a lot of the majority of the literature suggests that manipulatives can't be given to students as is because it doesn't carry any meaning for itself. Teachers have to provide guidance and allow students to reflect and discuss as needed throughout a lesson. And because of that, it makes a teacher's training in mathematical competency very important, because they need to be able to guide the students and help them make the connections between the visual and the mathematical ideas. So with that training, the literature also indicates that the lesson planning was a critical factor in the successful use of manipulatives. Teachers needed to have designed their lesson in a way to make the use of manipulatives more meaningful, rather than just something that is added onto a lesson. And so that structure of that lesson was very important. Teachers needed to provide students with procedural information instead of guiding students through every single thinking process, because too much of that control defeats the purpose of the exploration process. And on the opposite hand, too little structure can actually lead to chaos. And so there needs to be that balance of a systematic approach into utilizing manipulatives and maximizing its productivity. Here is a list of references that I have used to support the literature review. And in conclusion, the literature demonstrates the successful use of manipulatives that allow students to process abstract mathematical ideas and actually make sense of it. The use of manipulatives is actually just one component of building deeper conceptual understanding. Research has actually shown that it's a combined effort of an effective teacher's guidance and active student participation and lesson planning and preparation of materials that will allow students to internalize information and make it relevant to their lives. So I hope to discover that the use of manipulatives will deepen their understanding in comparison to data from the previous years of my teaching, and hopefully see the pre-assessment versus the post-assessment data that indicates student academic growth.